Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely wild story. How Europe literally rebuilt itself from the ashes of a fallen superpower. It's an epic saga of total collapse, gritty survival, and an unbelievable transformation.
Here is our roadmap for this millennium-long journey. We'll be hitting 5 major eras, starting with the glory of Rome, watching as the empire shatters, surviving a fragmented feudal world, tracking the rebuilding and expansion, and finishing up with crisis and rebirth. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. The Glory of Rome. Now we have to start here, because to really grasp the sheer scale of the fragmentation that hit the Middle Ages, we've got to understand the baseline of absolute prosperity they fell from.
Think about the Pax Romana, those first 2 centuries of the Common Era. We're talking about a unified Mediterranean enjoying a level of stability and wealth that wouldn't be seen again for over 1,000 years. It was an absolute marvel. You had centralized government, uniform currency, paved roads supporting massive long-distance trade. It was literally a high watermark for human civilization, all managed smoothly from one incredibly powerful center.
But nothing lasts forever, right? Moving into Part 2, the empire shatters. As it turns out, managing a hyper-centralized, massive empire becomes practically impossible when you're hit with a brutal combo of rolling plagues, runaway inflation, and relentless invasions.
The sheer scale of Rome actually became its Achilles heel, and things unraveled surprisingly fast. By 395 CE, they literally had to chop the empire in half just to keep the lights on. The eastern half stays relatively rich, but the west, it just crumbles. Fast forward to 476, and the last Western emperor, who was just a kid, Romulus Augustulus, gets officially deposed by a barbarian general. By the year 500, the Western Roman Empire was completely wiped off the map, replaced by newly established kingdoms ruled by barbarian kings. The so-called Dark Ages had officially arrived.
Which leads us directly into Part 3, a fragmented feudal world. With that massive central pillar of Roman authority completely removed, the entire landscape of Europe violently fractured. And right here is the absolute core contrast of this whole explainer. We went from this epic, highly unified machinery of the Roman Empire with its global trade and thriving metropolises to a hyper-fragmented, incredibly localized reality. Long-distance trade essentially vanished overnight, and localized warlords took over. It was like a giant puzzle had just exploded.
Without Rome's administrative backbone, the reality on the ground was pretty devastating. Those great, bustling cities? Depopulated. Some were just completely abandoned to rot. The famous Roman roads decayed, meaning communication basically stopped. Even actual coins vanished from circulation, which wiped out the economy needed to pay for professional armies. Literacy crashed. The peace and security of the Pax Romana was totally gone, replaced by a poor, vulnerable, deeply rural society.
And when you zoom out to look at the broader neighborhood, the contrast gets even sharper. Where there was once one huge unified civilization, there were now 3 distinct zones. In the south, you had the newly expanding, rapidly conquering Islamic Caliphate. In the east, the Byzantine Empire kept the Roman legacy alive, rich and urban. But the medieval West? It was the absolute glaring weak link, poor, politically and linguistically splintered, and just struggling to survive.
So, how do they survive this hostile new world, constantly getting hammered by Vikings, Hungarians, and pirates? Well, out of pure necessity, they built the feudal system. It was a harsh, ingenious survival mechanism, a massive web of mutual personal obligations. Kings were actually pretty weak, easily overshadowed by their own vassals. Local lords ruled their lands from basic wooden castles, literally using coercive force to subjugate the peasant class and extract whatever resources they could. And since cavalry warfare was so incredibly expensive, only the nobility could even afford to be professional fighters, which locked this whole rigid, unequal hierarchy into place.
But history never just sits still, right? Part 4, Rebuilding and Expansion. After centuries of being locked in localized survival mode, Europe was finally in a position to shift gears.
The year 1000 is an absolutely massive turning point. It basically kicks off 3 straight centuries of explosive growth. Why? Well, a combination of a better climate and new technological techniques sparked an agricultural revolution. But simply, they grew way more food. And more food means a massive population boom. Forests were cleared out, and an immense wave of economic expansion followed. As the population boomed, that intense feudal fragmentation slowly started to reverse. Urbanization exploded, bustling trade networks fired back up, and a brand new class of merchants actually fought for and won independence from their feudal lords to create self-governing cities, especially down in Italy. Literacy crept back up, leading to the very first universities. And central power began returning, most notably with the Catholic Church, which reformed itself into this incredibly robust papal monarchy, run by a pope acting as an absolute monarch with immense resources.
But just as society was really gaining confidence, history threw a major curveball. Part 5. Crisis and Rebirth. Right around 1300, the climate took a turn for the worse, setting the stage for a watershed calamity that would forcefully hit the reset button on European society.
I'm talking, of course, about the Black Death. Arriving in 1347, the sheer demographic scale of this disaster is staggering. It wiped out a full third of the population in record time. Entire settlements were literally erased from the map. It's hard to overstate the trauma of a plague that strikes with that kind of relentless, apocalyptic speed.
But here is the wild irony of it all. This horrific tragedy actually ended up breaking the iron grip of the feudal lords. With a dramatically smaller population, suddenly there was empty land everywhere and a massive labor shortage. This meant the peasants and workers who survived suddenly had tremendous bargaining power. They demanded and eventually got better conditions, higher wages, and new freedoms. It fundamentally ripped up the old social fabric of Western Europe.
And out of that post-plague darkness came a surge of creativity, like the printing press, but also a massive military revolution. Gunpowder hit the scene. Suddenly, the bravest, most expensive aristocratic knight could be shot off his horse by a regular infantryman. The strongest castle walls could be blown apart by cannons. Because these new artillery armies were so staggeringly expensive, only kings could afford them. And that meant kings could finally monopolize military force the nobles into administrative roles, and centralize power once again. This was the birth of the sovereign state, laying the groundwork for modern nations like England, France, and Spain.
So we've watched centuries of intense fragmentation finally fuse back together into centralized, sovereign nation-states. It's an incredible cycle, from unity to collapse to a totally different kind of rebirth, which leads us with a pretty fascinating question. Today, we live in this hyper-connected, deeply globalized world, one that actually kind of mirrors the massive trade networks of ancient Rome. So are we starting to move